So our Pia Seckelbach is here with us today to illuminate our eyes on one of many transparent people, so to speak, those we see but not really, right?
Yes, that's right, Ellie. Now, I met Tami Aviguy in her home in Haifa, and she has been in prostitution on and off for 17 years. And she says her getting into that field was a consequence of the experience she had as a child. She was sexually abused by her father. Now, let's see the report.
Tami Aviguy, an artist, a mother, and a survivor. Behind these bright handmade decorations, a dark past deciding. The direction her life took was decided by her father when she was 3 years old. That's when he started to sexually abuse her. A time that until now she remembers vividly.
I would decide that I would stay awake all night and wait for him to arrive, and I had a baseball bat on the side of my room where I would imagine, before I go to sleep, I would imagine that he'd come in and I'd whack him on the head with the baseball bat, and I would actually imagine his skull breaking and the graphics of the blood and me winning. And
Tami Aviguy never broke her father's head. Instead, he continued to assault her regularly from the age of 3 until about the age of 6.
There developed a language between me and my father. I call it the language of silence. And just because it was silent does not mean that there was not a whole language going on there. There was a language, there was a conversation between me and my father, and the conversation was that I would be quiet and take on this role of protecting my father with having to deal with the fact that I'm aware of what he's doing to me.
At 4 years old, she told her mother about the assaults at night. She, overwhelmed with the situation, did not help. Aviguy remained silent until one night.
I was already without my pajamas, and he was taking off my underwear, and I started crying. And this broke the silence, and this changed the rules. Because, you know, when this was happening to me, I was in a role of unconscious, not aware, right? And when I cried, suddenly he spoke to me. And he asked me, "What happened? Why are you crying?" And this never really happened before, right? I would just be in my own world, and he was in his old world, and I'd have what I had in my head and try and survive this.
That was the last time her father touched her, but the abuse changed her forever. Tami Aviguy grew up in Las Vegas, eventually moved to Israel. She got into drugs and alcohol as a young adult. Then, via an online platform, slowly found her way into prostitution. First in exchange for drugs, then for money.
For me, it was, reliving this place again and again was to make it okay. And not that I'm this little girl that's a victim and they're doing whatever they want. Now, I'm choosing this, right? I'm making a lot of money from this. People want me. I'm every man's dream. You know, I built this fantasy world for me that made it possible for me to live.
Aviguy was on and off prostitution, drugs, and alcohol for 17 years. She was diagnosed with psychiatric conditions. Her son, who is 15 today, grew up in foster care. 2 years ago, from one day to another, she stopped taking up psychiatric pills. Something that is not medically recommended, but, as she says, changed her for the better. When she went through withdrawal, she decided to confront her father and wrote him a letter. He claimed not to remember anything of what he had done and died shortly after.
When you live life hating so much another human being, I actually hurt myself more than I do the other human being. And one of the most difficult things to do in life is to forgive a person that never asked for forgiveness. Because I have a lot of knowledge in how to deal with a lot of darkness that most people do not know how to deal with. When you go through something and you know the way, you're sort of a way shower.
For the future, she wants to empower more people with her experience and teach what has helped her through it all, her art.
Wow, Pia, what a powerful report, a powerful woman. And you're telling us that the way she sort of slipped into this very dark world is something that we all need to be aware of.
Indeed, Ellie, she really slid into prostitution. You know, she came across prostitution via an online platform. She was entering that forum, and it was clear to her somehow that these men who were on this forum were searching for something different, but yet she didn't admit it to herself. And she called it an exchange of interest. She would receive drugs from these men, and she would offer her services in exchange of drugs. And it took her some time to realize, okay, what I'm doing here is prostitution. And then she also started to request money for it. Also,
wow.
The way of doing it like this, the way of entering prostitution online, this is something that actually happens very often. And there's an Israeli organization called Lo Omdot Meneged, not a bystander, that helps prostitutes, men and women, to leave prostitution. The founder, the director of this organization, Nama Goldberg, also says exactly that most prostitutes in Israel enter prostitution via online forums. And this is a very dangerous way, because prostitutes per se, they are very invisible, and them doing it online and also doing it in their home. Also, Tami, she never worked outside her home. It makes them even less detectable and also less obvious sometimes to themselves, as we see in the example of Tami.
Yes, and usually policymakers perhaps tackle brothels or more institutionalized, so to speak, prostitution structures, but not those individuals who are getting trapped in this extremely tragic situation. And before the show, you told me about one moment that you had while working on this amazing report that really continued to resonate within you.
Yes, that's true. Now, I visited one of her lectures that she started to do. It was at Tel Aviv University, and she never cried. She was so strong. She talked about all the terrible stuff that she's experienced. She cried only one moment. That was when she mentioned how much money she would take for her services, and she said that she would never take more than 350 shekels, which is about $90, and most of the time she would take less. That was the cost she attributed to her own body. And realizing this now, a couple of years later, this is what really touches her the most, and this is what makes her cry until this day, that she had such little self-worth.
And I know it is difficult to take one individual story and make it into a greater lesson for us all. But if we are trying to look at the greater scheme of things, what can be done on the policymakers level to try and clamp down on this industry?
That's a very difficult issue, of course, and the first and most important thing is not to stigmatize, not to judge the prostitutes, not to judge these men and women who are offering their bodies. They are most of the time not doing it because of their free will. They're doing it because of Tami. She was a drug addict. She was doing it in order to get her drugs. She was in a very difficult life situation, so policymakers should always tackle the ones who are taking advantage of these people, never the people themselves.